Before we begin, I wanted to put a disclaimer out there. If you couldn't tell by the title, this episode deals with pornography and pornography addiction. Although the episode is not explicit in nature and done in a tasteful and helpful manner, I wanted to be upfront to give you, the listener, the option to listen further. That being said, if you're someone struggling with pornography addiction or any addiction in general, I believe that my guest, Joshua Shea, has an honest story that you should hear. And if you're looking for help but don't know who to ask or where to go, or maybe you're too ashamed to ask, then this episode is definitely for you.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.
And now, here's a word from our sponsor.
Spartacus Coffee is made for and made by hustlers, entrepreneurs, peak athletes, self-starters, and free thinkers. Our community of coffee drinkers believe in lifting each other up to be the best version of ourselves we can be. On top of that, every sale goes to the nonprofit organization No Kid Hungry, a national effort to end childhood hunger in America. To learn more about that and order some of the best, richest coffee you can find at an affordable price, go to SpartacusCoffee.com and be sure to use my promo code. It's pretty simple. It's JBurke, which is JAYBURKE, and get 10% off your first order. Remember, Spartacus Coffee. We fuel the grind, we fuel the success, we fuel champions. We are Spartacus.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Estimates vary in the amount of revenue that is actually generated through pornography. The lower estimates say it's around $6 billion to a mid-estimate of about $15 billion a year. That's in the U.S. alone, and that was in 2018. That's a number that's certainly climbed at the height of the pandemic. Then there's Kasia Wozik, assistant professor of sociology at New Mexico State University, who believes that in 2015, pornography accumulated $90 billion in revenue globally. The reason the estimates vary is that the industry is run by private enterprises that don't need to produce corporate profits for things like shareholders. So in essence, they can fluctuate wildly. But let's take a look at some of the U.S. entertainment industry revenue estimates from 2018. When you look at the NBA, we're at $7.4 billion, and then it goes up to $11.1 billion for Hollywood. Netflix is at $11.7 billion, Viacom $13.3 billion, and the NFL at $14 billion. So that means pornography, at its lowest estimate of $6 billion in revenue in 2018, is really just a hair away from, I shouldn't say hair, 1.4 billion is a lot, but the point is, it's not far under the NBA. And if you take it at its mid-estimate, it actually grosses more than NFL football at $15 billion. So that's a lot to take in. And like the aforementioned revenue streams, studies on pornography seem to vary more widely than you'd expect. According to a study on aggression and sexual behavior in best-selling pornography videos, this is a study where 304 scenes were analyzed. The researchers found that 88.2% contained physical aggression, principally spanking, gagging, slapping, while 48.7% of scenes contained verbal aggression, primarily name-calling. Perpetrators of this aggression were usually male, whereas the targets of the aggression were overwhelmingly female. Targets most often showed pleasure or responded neutrally to the aggression. Then there's the flip side of that. In other studies, including one supported by researchers at Queensland University of Technology and published in the Australian Journal of Communication, shows that pornography has actually helped increase tolerance towards sexualities, including possibly having a positive outlook on one's own sexuality. That same study also found that pornography had helped partners become more open when discussing sex in long-term relationships. So the point is that pornography has had a huge cultural impact on our society in a relatively short amount of time since the advent of the internet. And we can argue its merits, that perhaps it has opened up our eyes or reduced certain stigmas surrounding sexuality, but it has also helped alter our reality and understanding of sexuality. I enjoyed this discussion a lot. Number one, because Josh is an intelligent, funny guy, but most importantly, an honest man talking about himself in ways that most people wouldn't. And this courage comes from the fact that he wants to use his story to help. And he also opened my eyes a bit. I was wondering how pornography pervaded and ingrained itself in our society. But Josh, to his credit, taught me that it doesn't really matter. Pornography is here now. And for those who have become addicted and the generation behind it, we need to learn how to set those healthy boundaries and talk about it openly. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the Joshua Shea with Jay Burke Show.
It won't always be a straight line.
It won't always be a straight line.
It won't always be a straight line.
But take the journey.
Take the journey.
Take the journey.
And escape a while for thoughtful excursions
into the world of ideas across media,
politics, technology,
pop culture,
and all realms of civic life. Take the journey.
Take the journey.
Take the journey.
Take the journey. Take the journey.
Take the journey.
You're listening to The With Jay Burke Show. Hello and welcome to The With Jay Burke Show. My name is Jason Burke, and though I'm technically the host of this podcast, it's the guests who truly take top billing. This is a place for curious minds who enjoy civil and sometimes meandering conversation. If you appreciate a few laughs and want to come away with new knowledge about subjects that aren't always easy to break down, then you're the person I want listening to this podcast.
Josh is an author, educator, and speaker on the topic of pornography addiction and a certified betrayal trauma coach. His third book, Porn in the Pandemic, How 3 Months in 2020 Changed Everything, was released in July 2020. Josh, thanks for coming by.
I got to tell you, Jason, when I got your request and then you told me that you were East Coast, I recognized that there was a teacher I had in high school named Jason Burke. We called him Mr. Burke because he made us, but his name was Jason Burke, and we didn't like him. And for just a moment, I was going to put the joke down. Hey, I'll absolutely do your show as long as you're not Mr. Burke at school. And then I thought to myself, my God, what if this is Mr. Burke?
What if it is?
I'm going to seem like an absolute, D-bag 30 years later saying, no, I won't talk to you. So I said, okay, I'll do this. And fingers crossed that there's one more Jason Burke than this guy on the East Coast. And thankfully you're not him. So I don't have to fake a smile and not bring up several incidents that I would like some clarity over.
I was going to say, you must have been, when you're about to click on the Zoom, must have been like, oh God.
Yeah, well, no, it's like, this is Mr. Burke. This is not going to go well.
Yeah, Mr. Burke. That's too bad that there's Jason Burke's given bed. And you know what? He's not a Gen X Jason Burke, so like we were talking about.
True,
so.
and for all the other Joshua Sheas out there, I'm sorry. I'll be the Mr. Shea to the Mr. Burke. I'm sorry. There's some poor kid who's a child actor with my name. And I know if you go like onto YouTube or you go onto Google, you Google our name, you get a lot of this kid and you get a lot of me. And I can only imagine what it's like being
between the two,
actor or actress, and having a name of somebody that, oh my, this kid, he's probably 20 now. And he is just like, oh my God, you look up him. And it's all his great work, and then just an amazing amount of pornography discussion. I keep waiting for like his people to like offer me a bunch of money to change, so he can keep going with. But until then, I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, maybe he's going around the circuit, just trying to use that as his story. His story in Hollywood.
He could. If they pay me off, then I'm going to pick a better name next time. Somebody more famous.
That's true. Money. Brad Pitt and his sexual
I'll somebody who's trying to do some good in the world.
Yeah.
Pay him off, and then just keep doing that.
Yeah. You know what? It's an inventive way to get ahead. But there's plenty of that in this world, right?
Oh, no kid. No kid.
Internet, which brings us probably to the internet. But I was going to say, I did find you, and I did find that Joshua Shea first, because IMDb pops up first thing. So, but I did my detective work and I got to the bottom of the case. So Scooby-Doo would have been proud of me.
No, that's good.
So
as long as you didn't take one of those Scooby snacks.
No.
Never found out what was in those.
I don't admit to anything. So you're from Lewiston, Maine.
Yep, I still live in the area.
Yep. So I saw you were in journalism, for 17 years? You started for your hometown paper?
Yeah, fine line of what journalism is. I ran several magazines for a while that weren't exactly the hardest hitting stories, but I was a legit journalist writer for 16, 17 years. And then the last 6 or 7 years of that career was mostly publishing and editing. And then after I got into recovery, before I started doing all of the recovery stuff, I worked as a freelance writer and ghostwriter for a little while from home while I worked on my first book, while I did the research, while I was in early recovery, because I don't know during early recovery if I could have kept up the pace and kept the focus that I do now. Because as you and I are talking, I am 1 week away from 8 years of pornography addiction recovery. And I'm only about 3 weeks away from 8 years of alcohol recovery.
So you took on both at basically the same time.
Yeah, I went to rehab first for alcoholism. And when you're in rehab, it's a lot like house arrest. You can probably get your hands on some contraband porn, but I was in such a shock, I think, of being in rehab itself that I stopped using porn. And then when my caseworker started to bring up the idea that maybe you have a pornography addiction too, because we talked about that very early, and I didn't even know it was a real thing at that point. I thought that my pornography use, while I understood I used pornography differently than most people, I thought that it was mainly just a bad decision I made when I was drunk, because those two things largely went together. Going back to me being 12, 13, 14 years old, those two things always went together. So when I was confronted with the idea that, wow, you actually also have pornography addiction, and I met with a certified sex addiction therapist off campus from the rehab I was at in California. And he helped me to really understand that it was a real thing. I also had it. And at that point, it was when I got to that rehab that I just ended up realizing that, he was right. And before I went to that rehab, I quit that first and then ended up obviously quitting the alcohol too. But ironically, I had to show up at the rehab drunk, or technically detox. Mm-hmm. If my insurance company was going to cover a bigger portion of rehab, I had to show up and blow drunk on their breathalyzer during intake. So that's really why I didn't quit both on the same day, was because I had to blow drunk to get into rehab at a better price.
So do they not cover, or do they cover a lesser amount of?
They look at it as detox and rehab. And they look at where are you as far as critically needing it. And if you show up at rehab, I guess not drunk and saying you need help for being a drunk, well, you don't clearly need as much help as if you showed up and were hammered.
Wild.
I don't know if it's liability. I don't know what it is at all, but you could tell the professionals and the people who had been to rehab before, because I was told this from somebody who had been to rehab before. I wouldn't have known. And when I was there, you could tell the people who showed up and knew what they were doing because they showed up drunk.
That's so interesting, because all I can think is telling myself, well, it's one last big bender before I get into rehab.
It is, but you're also flying across. I was flying across the country that day. So it was like I kept in an airport, you're spending $10 for a beer. Then on a plane, you're spending $12. Mm-hmm. And the last time I had anything to drink was about a quarter mile from my rehab. It was in the parking lot of the Laguna Beach liquor store at like 11:30 at night. And on March 31st or April 1st, I'm not exactly sure if it was past midnight or not. So I count April 1st as my sober date from alcohol. And then it was 10 days earlier from pornography. So coming up on 8 years here. And the last time I was 8 years sober, the last time I had gone 8 years without pornography, you're going back to me being 5 and 6 years old.
Wow.
And 5 years old up to 12 or 5 years old up to 14 or whatever it was, that would be the last time that I had that much sobriety time in a row. It was before I started using the first time.
So you were introduced to pornography at a very early age.
I believe that I was a porn addict the moment I saw it. I believe I was a porn addict before I even saw it. And it was just that it matched up. People talk about some of their porn addictions taking a while to develop. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was when my older cousin showed me a couple of hardcore magazines, it immediately did something to me. It was just like it. I have heard heroin addicts talk about when they use early on, they get this warm feeling flow through them. That's what I felt. I remember it distinctly. And I remember it distinctly also because it happened a second time. It happened that first time I got really drunk at a wedding when I was 14 years old. I felt that same rush of warmth. And it was like, oh, this is why people do this. I feel better. This is a lot like the porn. This makes me feel better. I don't worry about my life. I don't worry about other people. I don't worry about how I'm seen. And really from 12, 13 years old, straight up to when I got into recovery at 37 or at 38, actually, I could count on porn. I could count on alcohol. I couldn't count on anything else, whether I was married or single, whether I was in school or starting my career. It didn't matter what happened between 14 and 37. Those were the two things that no matter where I was in my life, I could count on, and I knew were going to be there for me. Can't count on people like that. Can't count on Mother Nature like that, but you can count on your addictive behavior to always be there for you.
Which is funny because when I was doing some research for this topic, that sounds terrible when I think about it, but I mean,
It's fun actually, but
I was just reading up on some things, and I ended up on a Quora page or wherever where people were talking about pornography. It was actually, I was trying to see the reason why the laws kind of protect it so much, especially since me and you grew up and the FCC, regulated the television stations pretty strictly, but the internet was able to just keep going, which is another story. But somebody had mentioned, I guess it just went off into some conversation, and somebody said porn was his therapy. It was, if he had a bad day, I can look at porn. If I had a fight with my girlfriend or my wife, I look at porn and then I just kind of feel better, or just anything. He just said it was like a washing away whatever feeling was under there. So just when you were mentioning, that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, and I can tell you that my alcohol use was very much about dulling my nerves and just kind of tuning out, dissociating. My pornography really was about control. And in talking to all of the guys that I coach now, there's always an aspect of control in there, because when you think about it, the people on the screen are never going to say no to you. And the people on the screen are never going to say, hey, take the trash out, or hey, you're late to work, or no, I don't feel like having sex tonight, or Daddy, can you build this toy for me? Or whatever it is, you excuse yourself probably from the area. You go and you sit down and you are the sexual dictator of your own universe. And if you don't like what you're looking at, you click the button and you get something new. And if you don't like that, you click the button and you get something new, and you are totally in control. And when I was in rehab and we did an exercise, that I looked over my timeline of my life, and those times that I felt the most out of control, those times where I felt like other people were running my life, or I couldn't get my stuff together. Those are the times where you see the most pornography use, because it was a way of almost fooling myself into believing that I had more control over things at the moment than I did. And I think that was ultimately the downfall with the pornography. And it was this, I used it because it made me feel like I could control things in my life. And that was an illusion that the addiction allowed me to keep up for so long. And that's not a healthy thing. You know, I had the abuse when I was young at the hands of a babysitter. I believe that's where I kind of developed some of my body autonomy issues. And I believe that was where I promised myself, you know, just get to the next day, just survive. Whether it's steal, cheat, lie, say what you have to do, manipulate, whatever, just get to the next day. Because as a 5-year-old kid, the horror of what was going on with me there, different types of abuse, I think that, you know, I tried to pack it away quickly when I was done with it. And then I think when I found pornography a couple of years later, when I was 12, I think without realizing it, that's what helped me repress all those memories. Because if a memory was starting to appear, I could just go to my pornography. And then a few years later, I learned, well, you also can go to alcohol. This is great. You've got two things that will completely take you away from your problems. So instead of developing problem-solving skills, I developed skills of hiding my addiction, of feeding my addiction, of becoming a manipulator to get my addiction, of doing whatever it was I needed to do to have those addictions nearby, because those were the only things I could count on. You know, the survival skills of an 8-year-old boy cannot be the survival skills of a 38-year-old man, but that's what I was dealing with.
That's usually how it works. I've talked about this on other shows where you just, most of us carry trauma from when we're a child, right? And it could be small, it could be big, but it's just,
yeah, absolutely.
It's
it
learning
doesn't
how to
matter how you rank it.
Right.
It's how it survives in your head.
Yeah. And you learn, well, I don't like that feeling, and you learn a way to cope with it. And you carry it, unless you're facing it, you kind of carry it through your whole life, right? And unless you sit there with like cognitive behavioral
that's
therapy.
Why deal with my feelings when I can pour a Red Bull of tequila and actually feel good?
Yeah. But I thought it was interesting, the control aspect, because a lot of times I think about something like this, like when I see it, I think about somebody, a loneliness, which I'm sure is an aspect for a lot of people. And sometimes it might be something that starts that, but the control aspect is interesting to me to think, because I'm guessing, you know, obviously you dealt with abuse as a child, and this is probably the way you controlled that feeling in some way, right?
If you look at my life, I have always had my own companies. I have always worked for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that when I was young, I told myself that I would not let anybody decide for me what I would do with my day, what I would do with myself, what I would do with my body. And despite the fact that I did hurt myself quite a bit with my choices, I was still telling myself, but at least they're my choices. You know, nobody else is telling me what to do. Nobody's making me do anything I don't want to do. Nobody's forcing me into anything. I'm my own guy. That's right. I'm my own guy. I just didn't step back and go, wow. And that is a really unhealthy guy who, you know, is not the nicest of human beings, and is really just at a core level doing what he can to survive, and playing David Copperfield in trying to create an illusion of a guy who's got it all together, a guy who's got a great life, a guy who, you know, don't look over here where the real magic's happening.
Yeah.
And I was able to keep it up for 24, 25 years, but, you know, thank God it all came to an end, because my last 8 years have been so much better. My last 8 years have been so much healthier. And I just, you know, that faulty thinking that 6, 7, 8-year-old kid had, that made sense at the time. But, you know, you don't go back and really look at, gee, what did 6-year-old me get wrong?
Yeah.
But But part of recovery was, 6-year-old me made a few mistakes because he didn't have any skills. He didn't have any resources. All he was trying to do was get to tomorrow.
Yeah.
So he did what he needed to do, and it worked for him, and it worked for me a lot in my life. I ended up, being a local politician. I ended up running a large publishing company. I created one of the most successful film festivals in northern New England that there still has ever been. I made myself crazy busy because I liked control. I've at home with my wife and kids, it was kind of always 50-50 with my wife and I. And there were times, early in our marriage where we would overdraft our checkbook. And I'd, what happened here? What happened here? It's because our communication wasn't strong. How is it that I can hit payroll and I can run a $3 million company, but we freaking overdraft our checkbook? And it's because the communication was poor, because I wasn't in total control. And that was really what my life was about. And looking back now with all those years of clarity, I can see exactly what happened. And it was a matter of trying to protect myself, trying to protect my feelings, trying to protect my pride, trying to protect everything bad that I had done, trying to just isolate from the world and not let it hurt me.
So when's the point that you realized you needed help? Or I guess I should say the breaking point, because you might have realized it earlier, but we tend to fight that feeling for a long time.
Yeah, there were, it's not like I didn't know. And the thing with pornography addiction, especially if you're active in another addiction, it's super easy to hide.
Yeah.
I couldn't hide the fact I was an alcoholic. I sounded like an alcoholic. I smelled like an alcoholic. I stumbled like an alcoholic. It's easy to hide porn addiction. I think that's one of the reasons it flies under the radar so much. But what really happened to me is that in my last year of addiction, I saw cracks in my publishing company. I saw things heading to a place where I didn't know how to handle them. The publishing company did very well for about 5 years, mainly because people had never seen these kinds of magazines in this part of the Northeast. And we did very well during what was the housing recession of 2008 to 2012. We did very well. It was only at the point when the economy started recovering and people decided to start being creative with their money that they started pulling their advertising dollars away. And I was like, okay, but new companies weren't popping up to replace them. After 4 or 5 years, I understand a company is like, okay, well, we tried you for 4 years. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do, it makes sense. There weren't the new companies to replace those advertisers who were leaving. And I didn't know what to do. So I made the horrible, horrible decision to pull myself off of my bipolar medication. In early 2013, I pulled myself off of my bipolar meds because I romanticized what the mania was. I remembered it from 15 years earlier in my 20s. And it was an unending fountain of energy. It was an unending fountain of outside box ideas. I only got to where I was because the mania of the bipolar pushed me in some ways. Who the hell starts a, publishing company in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this guy does, but it was great to have at some points. However, I romanticized what it did for me. So I said in 2013, I'm going to pull myself off of this medication. That will allow me a few extra hours to be awake. That will allow me some interesting thoughts. That will give me what I need to save this company. And instead of what happened was probably within 3 weeks, once the medication was out of my system, my alcoholism tripled, my porn addiction doubled. And for the bulk of 2013, both increased horribly. And in 2014, I had started to mentally recognize that I needed to slow down and I needed to make some changes. But I couldn't do too much because all of a sudden on March 20th, 2014, the Maine State Police showed up at my door. And they said that we know that you have talked to an underage girl online. And I was like, what in the hell are you talking about? Because you can tell when police pull up to your house, even when they're in unmarked cars. You and I watched enough cop shows in the 80s to know exactly. They're still driving these sedans that I think you can only get in Hollywood. And they pulled up, and I thought that I knew they were cops, but I had no idea why they were there. I saw them out my front window. I thought maybe I had done something screwy with finances with my businesses or something. I didn't know why they were there. They showed up. They had the warrant. I invited them in because when the police have a warrant, you invite them in. And we sat down and we had a very good conversation for about an hour. And they said to me, we know that you went online and you talked to this person. And while we don't know if you knew what her age was, that doesn't work for us. Here's what you did. And then I was like, oh, wow, you clearly got me. And what I had started to do in mid to late 2013 that I had actually stopped by the time that they had reached me is that regular porn wasn't doing it for me anymore. When you're talking addiction, you're talking about escalation. Mm-hmm. You're talking about the gambling addict who has to raise his bets to feel the same high. You're talking about, moving from beer to wine to the hard stuff. With every addiction, the brain demands more and more just to give you the same amount of high. Most people think that people who are addicts, doesn't matter what it is, we're searching for the next big high. And that's not true. We're searching for that first high because that first high was amazing. And that's what happens. And you never reach it again. And that's the problem, is that's why it escalates. That's why it gets so big. You're trying to go back and feel that numbness, feel that sense of okay that you felt so many times when you first used, before it turned into an obsession, a habit, before it turned into an obsession, before it turned into an addiction. And I got to the point where looking at traditional pornography was doing nothing for me. So what I started to do was to go into chat rooms and talk to people. And I would end up isolating with one woman, and we would go on, we would get into a private chat room, and I would, get very sexual with her and see if she would start to, do sexual things. And it was more fun for me if she said no at first, because I liked to be the one in power. I liked to manipulate. If I got into a chat room with a woman and, she just flashed her breasts, that's not what I wanted. That wasn't what it was about at all. It was about the chase. And I'll tell you how messed up it got was that I ended up being taught by someone else who was doing this online how to run a video of somebody, bypass my camera, run a video of somebody. And so they think that they're looking at me, but it's not me. And I can just keep typing my answers in the chat room we were at. So, cause it was a guy, literally a good looking guy, just literally typing. And so girls thought they were talking to someone who was younger and much better looking than me. Mm-hmm. And that's how I was able to, if I could get a woman who said no, she wouldn't show me anything or do anything, to do it after 2 or 3 hours, that was my success. That was my control. And that last year of my life, if you walked into my office at the magazine, you would have seen lots of plaques and trophies and other things on the wall, but they weren't there to show you how awesome I was. They were there for me to walk in and be reminded how awesome I was, because I was in such self-loathing. I hated myself for most of my life. And I collected these trophies as a way of telling myself I was special. And the thing that I would do at the end of these sessions with these women is that I would take a screen capture or two and I would throw them into a folder. And those became my trophies. And it's like, I never used that folder for, masturbation or for porn purposes. I wasn't interested. If I wanted to look at porn, I know how the internet works. Yeah. I could go do that. But these were just the people who I would take a screen capture and be like, aha, I got you. And, you did what I wanted. You fell to my expertise. Granted, it's 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. here on the East Coast. And somebody who's probably equally as hammered is, I'm able to suggest to them to do this stuff. And what ended up happening was one of these women ended up being a teenager, and the police found out, and they came and they laid it out for me. And there weren't any other, underage people, but one is one too many.
Yeah.
And that was really my wake up call. That was when everything changed. March 20th, 2014, the day they showed up, which, like I said, ironically, I hadn't been doing that. I had been already recognizing I needed to change my life. I'd already stopped. I hadn't done that kind of stuff online for 3 or 4 months at that point. They found that I had done this in November 2013 with the teenage girl who was there. But it was one of those moments where when it happened, I was like, oh my God, my life is different forever. My life has changed forever now. And after my conversation with them, when he and I were riding to the sheriff's office together so I could be properly booked, he said to me, you are one of the calmest guys I have ever seen. He said, and I said, well, you got me, and it's about time, and maybe this will help. And he said, I think you're going to do great. He said, I know you're not one of these guys who is, a stalker or a predator. He's like, you're a sick guy who made some mistakes. Use this time to get better. And I'm so glad he said that to me. And I actually called him about 3 years later and said, hey, I just want to tell you, you were right. Thank you so much. And he's dropped me a note every now and then if a new book comes out or something else happens that, still watching you, still see you're doing great. And, I have to live with the fact that I did something really heinous and I did something really horrible to that girl. I also live with the fact that I did it to a bunch of women in their 20s and 30s. It's not cool that I did it to them either. But you really can't do it to anybody who's under 18 years old. And I did. So I rightfully paid the price for it, but that price also was my sobriety, and I got better. And if that hadn't happened to me, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you today, Jason.
Yeah.
I think I'd be dead, honestly, had I kept going. So it's one of those things that was a very mixed bag, but I now look back 8 years later and go, I hope wherever that girl is now, she's an adult now. I don't know what's going on. I hope she doesn't even remember it. I hope it's a minor league little thing for her. It didn't cause great, mental problems or great anxiety or anguish. That's hard for me to live with because I created victims and I don't like that. I always was the one who I always portrayed myself as a victim, and to find out I'm the one who was doing the victimizing, that's a wake up call and a half.
Jeez. Well, did you find then some kind of relief when you were caught? I mean, obviously, probably after the initial shock.
I found relief in knowing that I wasn't going to go down the same road I was going on. I owned 1/3 of the company. I ran it day to day, but I owned 1/3 of the publishing company. The 2 other owners fired me that night, and that I was arrested. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me. That was the best news I got all day, because I was just recently a city councilor. I was a very well-known person in town. After I got arrested, I was at the sheriff's office for about an hour. Ironically, I knew all of them. They were all very nice to me because of the work I did, both as a city councilor and and in the media. I knew everybody I was dealing with. So I was only there for, 30 minutes to an hour. After my wife picked me up, I went back to my office so I could tell the people working, hey, I got to get the hell out of Dodge for a little while. And there's going to be some weird stuff about to go down. So just don't talk to the media. And I got there, and the guy who did our design work for our magazines, he was like, what did you do? And I was like, why? Because it's already on the wire, because we had the Associated Press stream coming. I was like, oh my God. And what happened to us, I found out later, was they knew I was a big fish. They knew it would be noteworthy. So they had a press release ready for the moment that I was arrested to go out there. And unfortunately, it had a bunch of incorrect information. So a lot of early news reports were incorrect. And I think made things out to sound a lot worse. But, 2 years later, when I finally pled guilty, I pled guilty to, going and doing that to that woman, and using a video, since she didn't know it was me. That was, what's the charge called? Not endangerment, but, I'll think of it in a minute and I'll yell it out. Exploitation, excuse me. It was exploitation of a minor because she had no idea what I was doing. And then I got nabbed for having 2 pieces of child pornography because I took 2 screen captures of her. And while there was all kinds of other loud noises around what I did, that's what I did. That's what I got convicted of. And unfortunately, that was, like I said, I hope that nothing happened to her negatively, because I hate to think that this horrible, horrible thing that happened to her and happened to me and happened to my family and all, I ended up better for it. And I just hope somehow she did too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, at least you're using it now to help others, and something that really goes kind of unnoticed. I don't want to say unnoticed because we do know what's going on and how easy and accessible pornography is now. Especially, we both talked beforehand that we're from Generation X, so that was a different time where
magazines and VHS.
You had to work for it.
Yeah,
for it a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the thing is, I wonder, if we give every 10-year-old kid the greatest porn computer in the history of the world with their smartphone and send them out. And it's like you and I had to do some work. And I thought, I found a convenience store that would sell me alcohol. Yeah. I found a video store that would rent me adult films. I did all of this MacGyver, James Bond stuff to feed my addiction as a 15-year-old boy when, now you order pills over the internet and, nobody bothers you if you buy alcohol, and you've got weed is legal everywhere. And now you've got, nonstop pornography, being shipped to every child. And this isn't the Playboys that you and I saw. If you can spell man, sex, and goat like any 5-year-old kid, you can see a man having a sex with a goat, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I mean, the amount, when I was doing some of the research, I mean, there's been some cases, obviously, where I think Ashcroft in 2004 was trying to go after the industry a little bit. And he said, I had it somewhere, something like a kid can accidentally get to a pornographic website. There's about 28,000 different ways he can see pornography by accident, just by accident. Oh, yeah. Which is actually, I think, probably happened to everybody at some point. You type in something and you're like, whoa, where did that come from?
Well, and still these days, I got a inheritance from my uncle about 2 years back. And it's like, I ended up buying a Toyota Tacoma. But I was like, I'm going to go see what it costs for a used Hummer. And it turned out that it'd been so long since I used the word Hummer as a euphemism that, okay, what's a Hummer cost?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? When it popped up that you could get a really low budget one around here for $100, it was like, oh my God. Oh, wait. Wait. We're talking.
You're sitting there thinking, okay. I guess it needs some work.
I see what's happening here. Yep. I need to type in, a few more details into my search if I'm going to learn about the vehicles.
I remember I was working at a bank. I mean, this is going back. This was like 2007. And somebody came in, they had some credit card fraud, and it's basically someone the age of your grandma, nice little old lady. Yeah. Somebody's got her debit card number somehow, and they were charging stuff up. And a lot of times you'd see the website, and it was usually, something stupid they wanted to buy. that wasn't illegal, but I was with the lady and I said, I wonder what the site is. I wonder what they tried to get. And I pulled it up and it was straight up porn. And I'm like, this is on my workstation. And I have an 85-year-old lady here looking at it. And it was embarrassing, but I never pulled up anything again. Well, I said, let the people who handle that do that. But I used to do it all the time. I'm like, yeah, it looks like they bought, a couple of guitars or they bought, this or that, a video game. But I remember that.
And that's it. And that's what, I whenever I give a presentation somewhere, there's almost always, if there are parents in the audience, some who come up to me afterwards or even during the Q&A section are like, well, what do you think of filters? And it's like, filters are designed for you. They're designed for you to stick your head in the sand and not worry about things. Yeah. Filters have never been designed for the user. They're designed for the overlord of the user to turn their head the other way. Because we do not live in a world where you can hide pornography from your children. You could put, okay, you lock down their phone. Congrats. You locked down one of the 5 billion phones. Last I looked, it was 4.8 billion. It's going to be over 5 now. You locked down one of them. Great work. Thank you. You saved us all from pornography. Thank you for locking down that phone. What happens when your kid gets on the bus and the kid sitting next to him, doesn't have parents who block that stuff out? What is your kid going to say? What is your kid going to do? It is not a matter of if your kids are going to see porn. It's a matter of when. And that's why we have to talk about this. It's not just talking about porn addiction. My story shows where you can go. I mean, for 22 years, I was a functional addict. Let's say, I don't think there's any functional addict, but let's say I could do my day to day just fine. I would not have gone and talked to women in chat rooms. To me, that's cheating on my wife. And I did that. Even though there was no physical, and who cares whether they're 16 or 26 or 36, I'm married. That's cheating. And then to go and try to cajole them into doing sexual things, that's really twisted. I would not have done that for, 21 years of my 22-year addiction. But that shows you where it can go. And that's really why I start with that message of my own story is if I can get to these places, anybody can. We think of stereotypes of porn addicts and, the 19-year-old guy who lives in his mom's basement's never kissed a girl in real life, or the creepy old man running through the park in the trench coat. These are our porn addicts in the world. But if I can be this, anybody can be this. In rehab, I met doctors, I met women, I met young people, I met old people, rich people, poor people, every demographic you can imagine. And that's where, I enter this space with my story, but we need to learn so much more because not every kid on that bus is going to be a porn addict, but every kid is going to be exposed to porn. And what do they need to know either before they're exposed or in those early years to understand? And that's why I try to tell parents, this is not the sex talk. I know this is what's keeping us away from talking about pornography. Right. We are not about the sex talk here. This is about the don't do drugs in my house speech. This is the no smoking speech. This is the no drinking speech. This is the when you're old enough to make your own decisions, you can do what you want. But when you live in my house, these are the rules we live with. And they'll go behind your back and look anyway. But at least you've said it in a normal sort of tone. I think just doing something like this is going to help hugely. Just letting your kid know this can be a dangerous substance. This can be a dangerous thing to look at. At 10, 11, 12, you shouldn't be looking at this stuff because it can do some damage to your brain. Can do some damage to the way you look at the world and think about things. And there is a generation of young, unhealthy sexual males and females who they're not technically porn addicts, but porn led them to be unhealthy. And that's why when, like I said, I told you earlier, I was at a college earlier this week giving a presentation. The first thing I let everybody know is I'm not your, conservative grandpa. Yeah. I am not anti-porn whatsoever. I am pro-healthy sexuality. Being anti-porn would be like being anti-alcohol. and we saw how poorly that went 100 years ago, to suggest that, we could get rid of pornography or the depiction of pornography. I don't know if we didn't have any of it, if that would be any healthier. I think that would be, just as unhealthy if, the expression of sexuality was stamped out when you consider it in art and in media and in all these places. And the fact that unless it moves into that illegal territory, it's absolutely legal. So I'm not going to go out and try to fight pornography. What a losing battle.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to get people to learn more about it, whether they're an addict or whether they're not. So when these statistics come out in 10 years or 20 years, hopefully they are showing that we've plateaued or we've dropped, because lately they are just, especially with the pandemic, they are just skyrocketing. And I'm not saying don't look at porn. I'm saying if you're going to look at porn, know what you're getting into.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to normalize that conversation with kids, I think, too, because if you don't normalize it, it becomes something in their head, and now they want to know more about it, right? I mean, it's just natural.
Well, and you're my age.
Yeah.
When I was 5, 6 years old, we had HBO at my house. We were one of the few people who had the one premium channel, and my mom would let me watch like any Full Metal Jacket, Rambo, Platoon, any of these. My mom would let me watch the goriest, violent movies ever. She would let me watch, horror movies, The Shining, The Thing, these movies that still scare me at night. She let me watch those. But God forbid a breast come on the screen. God forbid.
My mother was the same way.
Butt comes on the screen. So here's the message. It's okay to kill people.
Yeah.
It's okay to watch killing of people. It's okay to do, but oh my God, if you see a boob or a butt or a penis or a vagina, that's the end. That's the end.
I used to have the same thing in my house. And I mean, my mother was much more conservative, so she didn't really like the blood either. But, God forbid, she could take that more, but God forbid it was anything sexual. It was just the most uncomfortable feeling in the world.
Oh my God. Did you ever look away? Like if you're on the same room and that there's a scene coming up, and it's like, you want to enjoy the scene because you're just a heterosexual little kid who, you're curious.
It's the weirdest
thing.
But then
mom's there, so you're going to be like, oh, well.
You start talking.
Yes, I think that was a fantastic dinner, Bob. Thank you very much. It's like, why is it that you're talking in the voice of a game show host and you're 8 years old and there's a pair of breasts on the screen? There's no way this is all a coincidence. No, I'm trying to throw you off the track that I'm not making it a big deal that there are breasts.
And it's always funny in those moments because usually if you're by yourself, that breast was a flash on the screen.
Oh, 2 seconds. Not even 2 seconds.
Yeah, it's so quick. But when your mother or your father's in the room, it's like, why is this in slow motion
for an hour?
Why did time stop? Is Professor X here? What happened? So
that's so true. That's so true.
Oh my God, it's so funny.
Why are you watching scrambled TV? I'm not. I'm flipping channels.
Yeah.
That's not the Playboy channel.
That was another. Well, that's what we talked about. You had to work for it when you were a kid. I mean, you kind of just accidentally ran into it. But I do remember, friends would have that on and it'd be like, oh, it scrambled just right for a second,
Yeah, exactly.
But that's what,
it's almost quaint talking about it this way now.
Yeah. You know what? And it's funny. I've said this to my wife, like watching Game of Thrones or something like that, or any of those HBO shows or on anything. Every week there was nudity on that show, whether it was sexual or not. And I'll remember like 1 week there wasn't, and I noticed it. I'm like, wait a second. Nobody was naked this week. That's how desensitized I was to it. It didn't make a difference that people were naked on it. I just had noticed that nobody was. And it blew my mind at how different things had gotten. But, media is so different and the times are so different that when we were kids, we only had the 30 channels or whatever. You were lucky if you had HBO. I know I didn't for a long time. But I used to go to my friend's house and he'd have HBO. You know, they had HBO and Cinemax, and I was like, "Oh my God, you're the richest person."
BMX Bandits every afternoon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, but now it's there's just so much content, and you know,
But it puts you this way. One of the craziest stats out there. About 2 years ago, Pornhub had to pull down anything that they could not confirm was of age or that was a consensual act of people who wanted to be filmed and displayed. Gotcha. Then the reason they had to do this was because their payment gateways, MasterCard, Visa, or whatnot, threatened to pull themselves down. So, because keep in mind, this is all about money ultimately. This whole thing is all about money ultimately. Pornhub had 13.5 million videos at the time. They pulled down 10.5 million videos. Of their 13.5 million videos, 10.5 million could not be confirmed as of age or of consensual performers. And they didn't skip a damn beat because their 3.5 million porn videos that they could confirm, you and I could still watch them end to end on 10 computers until the day we die on a 24-hour loop and still never see the same thing. So it's not like they need more pornography. It's just that it keeps getting produced and produced. And I think that, and I didn't mention this in my last book. I don't think I did. It's actually been over a year since I read it. But I don't think I mentioned this. But what I'm really concerned about now, as we're probably coming out of this pandemic, is how many of these young people who went to cam sites, who went to OnlyFans, who started to make pornography at home to make ends meet. Because remember early on,
was
with the furloughs, with everything, retail sector, it was service sector. You're talking about young people, young gregarious people who were good at customer service, who all lost their jobs. And what happened at that point? The online world of cams and do-it-yourself porn like OnlyFans explode. When the pandemic started, there was roughly 300,000 people on OnlyFans making content. Recently, the CEO a couple months back said there were over 2 million people making content on there. So in 2 years, worldwide, we went from 300,000 people making porn to 2 million porn on just one website.
And they make a lot of money. I've heard this.
That's starting to change, actually. That's starting to change because there's starting to be such a mass.
2 million places. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, OnlyFans deliver what no porn could deliver when you and I were young. It's the last forbidden genre.
Mm-hmm.
Porn of people you know.
Yeah.
And that's the selling point. It's porn of people you know. And what's funny is that the people you know are the ones advertising they have these pages. Go look at my OnlyFans, and that tells you from our parents' and grandparents' generation when, your grandmother and my grandmother, if they went out in a two-piece swimsuit, there was maybe 1 inch of their stomach showing. And now we live in a world where, and you and I in high school, no social media. If you and I were in our junior or senior in high school and the buff football, quarterback and the super sexy cheerleader, they had gone to the beach and had a picture taken and it came back to school, everybody would be passing around this photo of your two friends, half naked, passing it around as if it's currency.
Yeah.
But you look now, every 15 and 16-year-old kid in high school with their Instagram account is expected to be half naked.
Yeah.
You can access half naked pictures of your friends all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And since there were and keep in mind, these kids under 25 grew up in don't remember a world before the internet.
Yeah.
So access to sex, access to nudity, access to sexual depictions, all of this stuff has been at their fingertips. They have a much more open attitude about it. It's not taboo. So really, what's the difference between being, 17 years old, and your birthday is next week, and showing a picture of yourself in a bikini? And what is the difference a week later when you're 18 taking that top off? Well, for most girls, it's $25 or $50 or whatever it is, because it's not a big deal to them. They don't apply the taboos, the attitudes, the social mores that we do, and certainly our parents did. And while that's probably healthier in some ways, I think it's gone so far that there aren't these, hey, if you're going to do this, at least watch this. If you're going to do this, at least keep this in mind. And what I wonder is, when I did that last book, I talked to people who were veteran cam models, veteran OnlyFans models, and I talked to newbies. And then I talked to them all 3 months later. The veterans were able to tell me how the customers changed. They were the same people, but the newbies were so different with 3 months of doing that kind of work. And what I heard, especially from some of the young ladies, this was kind of the saddest part, was that, in my real life, when I worked at the Gap, nobody would even look at me. Nobody ever asked me out on a date. And now I've got men from around the world who will spend $100 if, just to see a picture of me, or they'll spend $200 just for me to talk to them for half an hour on a webcam. And I've got men from around the world, begging me to marry them. And it's like, okay, what about the money? Well, the money's good. Yeah, but this makes me feel special.
Feeling.
I like this.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you are talking about dopamine. You're talking about serotonin. You're talking about oxytocin. You're talking about all the happiness drugs. So taking your clothes off gives you a high. It makes you feel good. Just like seeing people do that gave me a high and made me feel good. And I didn't think any deeper of it at the time, but I was dealing with trauma. I think a lot of these people are dealing with trauma. And really, when you think about it, isn't making pornography just the different side of the coin from viewing it?
Yeah.
You're getting those same chemicals.
It's also kind of, what were we calling about escalation, if you think about it. So you're talking about people look at your Instagram, right? And the dopamine and the serotonin. Even when you get a like, I mean, listen, this is fact. We know that social media companies figured out how to target you and how to hit your brain, so that dopamine hit makes you want to get more likes and things like that. It's kind of escalation from that, right? Like, okay, I can get some likes.
That's what 90%
with my pretty face.
90% of my male coaching clients, that's exactly what we're dealing with, is that they go on TikTok, they're 20, 21 years old. They go on TikTok. They see a pretty girl. Well, the way it works now is you click into her details and she'll have a page of links. One of those links will probably be OnlyFans.
Yeah.
Then you go look at that. I have all kinds of guys who tell me the same story. I go to look at Instagram, and the next thing I know, I'm looking at porn. It's because, well, you went to OnlyFans, or you started, it's an escalation thing where, okay, now that I'm on OnlyFans, oh, there's a different OnlyFans girl. Oh, she's a porn star. Oh, I can go watch her real porn on the regular internet. And these guys are never ending up, in a porn session with Instagram, porn session with TikTok.
Yeah.
A lot of times, not even a porn session with OnlyFans. It's just, these are the things that are dipping their toe in the water that gets them to the actual porn. So then afterwards, they're like, oh my God, what happened? I looked at porn again.
Yeah.
And, well, you started by looking at TikTok. Well, I can't quit social media. Well, dude, then you've got to figure something else out, because you're developing a porn addiction. If you can't get rid of social media, something else has to happen here. And that's what so many of these young men and women in this country and in the world are dealing with right now. And it's, when you and I were young, with no social media, there weren't these kinds of, peer pressure, whether it be direct or whether it be passive aggressive because the other girls and guys are doing this. It's a strange place we find ourselves in our world. And, I don't know if we're going to have any impact on the statistics, but we have to at least start talking about it.
I wonder
and
where.
not even in terms of addiction, just in terms of this stuff is everywhere. How are we going to deal with it as a society?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an issue of self-worth that's developed. Listen, you can look at the anxiety, you can look at the suicide rates, you can look at all these problems, and they are directly there's a straight line from when the iPhone comes out to all of these things happening, whether it's especially in children and young girls, with their self-worth or even suicide and things like that. I mean, there's a straight line for everybody, because even the adults are affected by this stuff. We don't have, our brain is just not, I mean, I've seen, I forget what that guy's name is. He did that social, Tristan something. Anyway, he did something about this, how basically it's designed as a dopamine hit. It's getting you high,
Absolutely. Because think about it, when, you look at these, like my wife's father was one of 17 kids. I think the family had moved from Canada at that point, but it was one of these.
Canada told them 17's too much.
Catholic, French, Irish families that didn't use birth control, believed in the world of the Lord and all that. And they had sex, well, at least that many times. And you got to think they probably didn't want a kid every time, but they kind of just followed their rules or whatever. And these days, though, I think that they probably had sex so much. Part of it was because it felt really good. And they didn't know how to not have children. But the fact is, having the sex felt so good that was what you dealt with. I think that you're only supposed to access those chemicals in that combination when you go to have sex. Because one of the things that I see out of so many of my male clients, straight up through in their 40s, but a lot of them are younger, is the erectile dysfunction as a result of watching so much porn. Because that's what I went after. And that's what addicts go after. But I think that's what almost anybody goes after to some degree is, the fact is, when you orgasm, you are having a chemical rush happen in your brain as well. And you're also having a chemical rush happen as you're looking at the porn. And when you think about it, you and I could go online for 2 hours and probably see more pornography than our grandfather, or certainly our great-grandfather, ever saw in his lifetime, most likely. What happens, and you guys, we're in our 40s, so what happens when you're 9 and that happens? What happens when you're 9 and that happens today, tomorrow, the next day? When you're 12, that happens today, tomorrow, and the next day. I think that we have figured out a way to kind of take a shortcut to get at these chemicals that feel so good. Why does sex feel so good? Because the chemicals feel so good. And we figured out a way to get at these chemicals. And unfortunately, while we figured this out, we figured out the shortcut to get to the chemicals. Unfortunately, our brains can't always distinguish between the difference between a visual scene on a computer screen or a TV screen and the real thing in front of us. Now, obviously, our mind knows this is a real man or woman in front of me, but our minds don't always truly recognize that. This is why people don't use pornography, the same pornography, a second time. Why would you use what you've already seen?
Right.
I need something new to tweak me, to get me there. So this is why you see so many marriages, relationships being ruined by pornography, is because the man can't get hard or can't finish. Because if you've been with this woman 100 times or 1,000 times, or you've been married for 10 years, or you probably know how this movie ends when you get together and have sex.
Yeah.
And the thing is, but our mind, if we watch a lot of pornography, will just, I've seen this. I've seen this way too many times. There's nothing special about these breasts. There's nothing special about, love to this person. There's nothing special in this area. And that's what so many of these young guys are going through, is that, I had a guy, who he's a 19 or I think he's 20 now, college student, who we worked for several months on this. And he ended up going on a Tinder date with somebody, and he was able to successfully have sex the first night. The next morning they tried again. He couldn't. They waited about 5 or 6 hours. He couldn't again. But he did the first night. And for him, that was the biggest victory. But it was like, dude, you still couldn't do it 2 times the next day.
Yeah.
Because
It's been
there.
I was going to say, it's like the porn site, right? You saw it.
And well, the thing is, and this was understood to be only a hookup. This was not going to be a relationship. This was not going to be, when you're, it's cheesy, but when you're making love to somebody you care about, it's a different mental experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you can do it again and again. There's a reason we have the one night stands. It's because we can only stand them for one night. And, and that's, that's a lot of what porn is. But our little monkey minds have not evolved in 3 generations. From when our great grandfathers never saw porn to us now being able to see the most out there, outlandish porn 24/7. Our brains can't handle that. Mm-hmm. We did not evolve that much in 3 generations. So we now have statistics about how unhealthy this is becoming for young men and young women, for all men and all women. And we need to get these out there and share about them, because I think there are still a lot of people, and a lot of people are in control in this world, who are like, go talk to a 75-year-old member of Congress and ask him how pornography has changed in the media over the past 30, 40 years. He won't know. She won't know, because they're not following this kind of stuff, because there's so much more important stuff out there, whether it's COVID or Ukraine or Black Lives Matter or the opiate crisis or raising your own kids or having your own job. It's just nowhere near the top of anybody's priority list. And we have to start making it that way a little bit more, or we are going to be in a very unhealthy sexual society very soon, if we're not already there.
It's interesting when I'm thinking back a little bit, and we're Gen X, and then there was the boomers. In the 60s, the boomers did have a sexual revolution at one point, but then they kind of went totally conservative about it. Yeah. In the 80s, right? Or the late 70s or whatever.
Well, it turned out they could make money, and they wanted money more.
Yeah, well, that's...
They all became stockbrokers.
It was. I always thought that was very interesting, that they went from the civil rights movement and the Beatles and the Stones.
Well, our grandparents worked very hard, so our grandparents didn't have to work hard.
Right.
And they didn't. And then they turned us over to a world where we didn't want to work at all.
Yeah.
And now we've got these younger kids who are like us. Why work when you can just show your boobs for 15 minutes a day and sell pictures of it?
Yeah.
Why, we're in a place in society where, I think we need to go back and revise the idea of greatest generation, because I just don't think that their legacy is going to hold up over time. They became, after it was the Depression. The Depression went from the roaring 20s, from sexual openness, the flappers, and people having parties, and the 1910s, 1920s, great party times, free society. Then you hit the Great Depression, and then we start to slowly go from a agricultural society to a manufacturing society.
Yeah.
And things just changed, and it wasn't until our friend Mark created Facebook. I really think that it wasn't even the internet. It was the creation of Facebook, or maybe the creation of MySpace, but nobody really admits to ever having used that. That's like the bad neighborhood of the internet. I think that Mark Zuckerberg pushing Facebook out there is really and I think the iPhone was absolutely, as far as use of how to get to it easy, take it everywhere with you. But I think Facebook was the beginning of the social media revolution. And, it didn't take long for a couple, college guys to go, gee, if we created this thing called Snapchat where a message would disappear in 6 seconds, I bet there'd be a whole lot of people sending naked pictures to each other. And it turned out that was true.
Yeah. No.
And because throughout history and throughout media, more importantly with media, you go back to the 1930s, 1940s, when radio started to make its way to film and to television, sex has always been on the leading end of this. It's like two things have been on the leading end of two things are on the leading end of all new media creation: sex and professional wrestling. Because
Really?
people will watch both. They're both very cheap to produce, and you'll get a ton of eyeballs on it.
I did read when I was researching stuff, there was a lot of people who said basically the internet porn pioneered a lot of the internet. Think about paywalls and stuff like that.
And I'm still watching this because it's still on, but Hulu, you'd probably find this interesting just because you were alive at the time. But Hulu has a great docu-series called Pam and Tommy out right now, which is about how the sex tape got stolen from Pamela Anderson.
Oh, I remember this. Yep.
And how it got out there and how it really, back then, and it's such a well done, but somebody be like, no, we will sell this, the guy who stole it, we will sell this on the internet. And people are like, is that the WWW thing?
Yeah.
And it's oh yes, this is right. 95, 96. This was right when it was just starting to go mainstream. And it's not just fascinating for that as a historical document. It's also great because two of the episodes, and I wrote about this on my blog recently, two of the episodes really get into what the tape did mentally to Pamela Anderson. And you start to understand that, what is revenge porn? What is this kind of stuff that we didn't think about we don't think about with certain people because they're celebrities or they're sluts or they're porn stars or all this kind of stuff. We don't think about what pornography does to these people. We don't think what pornography does to the society in general. And right now we're all running around like a bunch of coked up little monkeys with these, sex chemicals going through our head in the right combination. And we can't get it up, to procreate like normal humans, like we were intended, like we did for, hundreds of generations. Now we figured out a way to get all that happy feeling without having to buy anybody dinner or without having to, become a well-rounded person. And so we have our porn at night and we have our high with our chemicals at night, but people don't realize that addiction is addiction. And when you look at there's actually 6 or 7 different chemicals that make up your pleasure centers. And when you look at the combination of chemicals that do result from pornography addiction in most people, the closest addiction formula-wise with those pleasure chemicals is cocaine. So that's how you can, when people are like, it's just pornography, it's like you would never say it's just cocaine.
Yeah.
But that is as strong as the drive, because it's essentially the same chemical makeup you're getting with the dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, melatonin, a few other things. You are getting a mix of chemicals that is similar to cocaine use or addicted cocaine use. People need, whether it's gambling or drugs or alcohol or sex or food or video games, addiction is addiction. Porn addiction didn't take place between my legs. Food addiction doesn't take place in your stomach. All addiction takes place in your brain.
Yes.
That's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in a place where we now know how to short circuit our brain with sexual imagery.
Mm-hmm.
And that really affects some of us really hard, but it's affecting everybody because it's affecting overwhelming attitudes. And I'll tell you, I just had this confirmed again the other day. 2 years ago, this has nothing to do with addiction. This is just pornography. And that's, people say, well, so it's just pornography. Forget addiction. Okay, forget addiction. There is no college freshman, 18, 19-year-old boy who has not grown up on pornography. I've spoken with so many women of college age who do not want to have sex with virgin men, especially when they're in college. And I've had the same conversation again and again, and it's because these guys grew up watching porn. And if you grew up watching porn and you haven't had sex yet, you don't truly understand that pornography is not a documentary.
Right.
Pornography is not a reality show. You and I can see porn and see everything that's fake. We know it. We know,
Right.
we know people don't do those things in real life.
Yeah.
Or if they do, it's only on your birthday. You don't do those things. That's not how normal people are. But if you started watching at 12 years old, if you're 18 years old, and if you watch, say, even just 5 or 6 porn clips a week, you have now seen thousands and thousands of porn clips by the time you're 18. And if you're in college and you finally have found a woman who is willing to have sex with you and you're going to lose your virginity, where are you going to go to in your mind for your working knowledge of what you're supposed to do? You're going to go to all of those sexual images you've seen. So these women talk about even guys who grow up seeing the most vanilla porn. When you think about it, you're going to see the guy saying horrible things to the woman, and she doesn't say it in return. He's probably going to be far more aggressive, or he's probably going to have his hand across her throat at some point.
Right.
He's going to bend her in ways that, you're not supposed to be bent and that he won't be bent. And these all finish in a way that real sex between two people doesn't finish with a girl looking up at you from the floor. That's not how it goes in real life. But if that's how these guys think, well, these women have told me stories of, you shut the door and suddenly you're with this guy who thinks he's a porn star and he's pushing you on the bed. And it's like, whoa. Hey, calm your roll. That's not how this works. And so many of them have shared stories with their friends, and it's been years of this now, that there are a lot of women of that age group who specifically do not want to have sex with virgin men because they know they've been so tainted by porn. That's where we are in society. Forget addiction. That's what porn is doing to us in society, is changing these things around at these young ages. We need to, and we're never going to go back to the way we were, and I don't think it would be healthy to go back to the way we were. What we need to start doing is having discussions about healthy sexuality in this world.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a bunch of shocking porn statistics, I call them, but one of them was a survey showed that 1 in 4 18 to 24-year-olds, which is almost 25%, listed pornography as the most helpful source to learn to have sex. So what you're talking about, that's exactly what that is. So somebody who's not experienced and as a young kid.
God forbid they grow up in a situation where their mom or dad isn't there for them,
Right.
And I can feel compassion and I can feel empathy for a lot of these people. But what would, how much time did you waste in health class in high school? That one semester you didn't take gym and had to take health, learning about, the birds and the bees that you knew in 6th grade, or them, drugs are bad for y'all. Okay, thanks. I'm 16. I can tell you exactly what they do to you. What if we just had one of those classes where we talked about pornography and we'd not, you and I have been talking here for well over an hour now and we have not got graphic. You don't need to get graphic.
No.
You don't need to talk. And then 3 guys were doing this to 2 girls. And no, we can talk. We all know what we're talking about when we say pornography. So, I think that, we need to grow up. We need to put our big boy and big girl pants on. And what Generation X can do is start the education and start trying to get us to a healthier place. Because God knows our parents aren't going to do it.
No.
Aside from the fact they're old, they couldn't imagine talking about this stuff. My mom has never heard me on a podcast. My mom has never read one of my books. Yeah. My mom wants to think, I think that I'm a virginal 5-year-old boy who still lives at home with her. And that's not healthy. My kids are going, if they're going to, have kids, they're going to have sex. And the reality is, Mom, you and Dad got together one night. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about this in healthy, normal terms.
Yeah. I mean, it's something, it's so weird because it's what you were saying, right? When we were talking before about watching TV and you could see 1,000 people getting killed, I think, I watched something with George R.R. Martin saying, who writes the A Song of Fire and Ice, or you want to call it Game of Thrones or whatever. And he said the amount of mail he gets when yelling at him basically for describing sex in his books compared to what he doesn't get for the amount of violence he has. He's like, this sexual repression in this society is just unbelievable. He's like, I've tortured and maimed and did so many things to people. And
that's, I think people are surprised when I don't come out and say, stay away from porn, stay away from porn.
You can't.
It's
anyway.
never going to happen. Let's be smart.
But how
let's
did we,
be smart.
How did, I guess it's money. We talked about that before. It's just so funny that we were so, there was a lot of regulation against this kind of stuff on TV. You can go back to George Carlin talking about 7 words you can't say on television and things like that. How did we let the internet run wild with this stuff, especially coming from
we didn't know what it was.
Yeah, I guess. But I think about the era right before that where, they were blaming video games for causing violence. And then pornography was allowed to get just absolutely insane.
It was the rock music lyrics that were going to.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Listening to it backwards somehow made you a murderer and stuff like that. But, I guess, I know they had the Communications Decency Act, and then, what was it? Section 230 kind of takes away any
They've
kind
had
of
all
liability.
kinds of these things, but you know what? The technology is going to stay ahead of the law.
Well, that's true.
The law works slow.
Right.
Technology doesn't. Technology is always going to be ahead of it. And human nature is always going to be ahead of it. Why don't we stop denying who we are? Why don't we look in the mirror and not see total pieces of crap or total, kings and queens?
Yeah.
Why don't we see the world for what it is? Recognize there's good and bad, there's light and dark, and there is nothing wrong with legal pornography made in legal ways, used by, 1 or 2 healthy people who are doing it consensually.
Right.
There's nothing it's like there's nothing wrong with going into a pub and having a beer or 2 with your friends and then leaving. Right. It's just that I can't go to that pub and have 1 or 2 beers. I will say goodbye. You guys can go. I'm going to stay here and keep drinking until they kick me out. It's like, it's like I can't go and look at normal porn, because it will send me off to another place. I know this about myself, but there are a lot of people out there who have still never heard of pornography addiction and who are like, well, it's just porn. It's not like I'm using heroin, or it's not like, I'm not like my friend who uses video games 16 hours a day. And it's like, no, dude, it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Well, God, I could talk about this forever, and maybe there's something else in the future. I would love to get it.
I've been on a lot of shows 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. No, well, you know what? I'd always love to have a conversation about like revenge porn or something, how that's legal and how you get around that. But I know we're coming up on time, so why don't you plug your books or how we can reach you?
Yeah, best way to reach me, whether you're interested in learning more about my coaching, whether you want links to my books, which are on a bunch of places online, or you just want to read more about addiction, or you want to get some resources. There are so many ways to battle addiction. The thing I can say is if you have any question about whether you have an addiction, I always say, well, do you ask yourself if you're addicted to vacuuming? No, because you're not. So if you ask yourself if you're addicted to something, there's a kernel of something there. And that's when it's good to go and figure things out.
Before you go,
before they get out of hand.
Do you think everybody has some sort of addiction? Because I think everybody has it in some way, shape, or form. It's just there's healthy addictions. Or
you could. It's a matter of our habits, addictions.
Well, that's true too.
And what's a bad habit versus a good habit? What is compulsion? I even think when we talk about addiction, I think there's a level above that I didn't reach. That's when you're like, you're like Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas, where if you don't have this stuff, you will actually die. But if we keep giving you this stuff, you're going to die.
Too. Yeah.
That's the level of addiction I never knew. But I think that's above mentally addicted. That's, physically dependent.
Yeah.
And so it's really splitting hairs between these things. And, I look at something like people who are addicted to, here in Maine, we've got all of these, especially this time of year, towards the end of winter, we've got all of these cliffs with the most amazing ice on them. And people love going and climbing these ice cliffs in Maine. But and these people are dedicated to this lifestyle. And you cannot say they're not addicted to the adrenaline.
Yeah.
They're not addicted to the rush. But how do the documentaries about them always end? Well, Bob died doing what he loved best. So did his addiction lead him to death? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
So we just have to watch our compulsive behaviors.
Right.
That's really what it is. Whether you think it's good or bad, just because it's not, meth or heroin, just because, it's not something you've assigned to a traditional addiction, doesn't mean that the same chemistry can't be happening in your head. And if it is, get some help, because addiction does not end well unless you get into recovery. Usually it ends up with you, in physical issues. Mm-hmm. It ends up destroying relationships. It could end up with legal issues, or it can end up in recovery. Mm-hmm. And thank God I went the recovery route. So if people check out P Addict Recovery, they can read. I post a couple articles a month, law stuff there. If they want to know more about the coaching I do, I coach both porn addicts and those with trauma from pornography, whether it's betrayal trauma from a partner using or themselves. You can learn all about it there, paddictrecovery.com.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this work, because I think it's really important and there's not enough people doing it. And thank you for taking some time to talk to us about it.
Thanks so much for having me today, Jason. I appreciate it.
I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day today and listening to the show. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more about the topics discussed in this episode, check out our show notes at my website, jbergshow.podbean.com. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, or wherever you enjoy your favorite podcast so you never miss out. You can also follow us at JBerg Show on Twitter and Instagram, and JBerg17 on TikTok for the latest updates and going-ons behind the scenes. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. It helps us improve and grow the show, and each and every one of you has such an impact on that, and I can't thank you enough. Join us next time, and remember,
it won't always be a straight line, but take the journey and escape a while for thoughtful excursions into the world of ideas across media, politics, technology, pop culture, and all realms of civic life.
You're listening to the With Jay Berg Show.